My name is Jocelyn Ajami, and I'm an artist. This commentary is directed to President Obama and to anyone kind enough to listen. President Obama, congratulations on receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, and thank you for acknowledging all those courageous people and organizations whose sole agenda is to relieve human suffering, for they are truly global heroes. I voted for you, believing that you are our only hope. I had considered renouncing my American citizenship because I felt that we had become a rogue state and that we had lost our ability to reason. And so it is in the spirit of hope that I share these thoughts with you and with the global community. In any relationship, even an abusive one, both parties must assess their role and responsibility. You mentioned that we are in a war, in a conflict we did not seek. When we support regimes around the world who oppress human beings, when we create intolerable environments, we seek conflict. When we invade countries without good cause and international law declares our actions to be illegal and immoral, we seek conflict. When we topple, undermine, and delegitimize democratically elected leaders, as we have done in Iran, Chile, and Palestine, just to mention a few, we seek conflict. It is naive to think that these cumulative actions would not result in chickens coming to roost, as Malcolm X so tragically stated generations ago. I realize that you are in an unimaginably tough position, that you are dealing with incredible obstacles, including a legacy of disaster. I realize that we must continue to be patient, but unfortunately, the price of patience is costly, even lethal to those who are suffering in the here and now. I understand that we must be vigilant, that we may need to arm ourselves against anyone who would directly attack us. We cannot be naive about that, but also we cannot afford to be naive about our own cultural ignorance, which is possibly a greater threat to our security, even greater than nuclear proliferation. When we don't understand the language, history, cultural context, and rituals of other nations, including our enemies, when we don't understand or acknowledge the historical record of our actions against them, our missteps are guaranteed. As Commander-in-Chief, I am sure that you are familiar with the first rule of martial arts: understand your enemy. And every now and then, there is another option, as President Abraham Lincoln so optimistically stated, "I defeat my enemy when I make him my friend." In this complex relationship between war and peace, there is the age-old problem of justice. Perhaps the Nobel Peace Prize Committee should consider changing its name to the Nobel Justice Committee to help us out. Peace has become a euphemism for dominance. Peace is always the weapon of the status quo, of the voices who under the guise of security choose dominance over justice. The voices of challenge, the voices of suffering, always seek justice, whereas the powers that be always seek peace. Our founding fathers created peace treaties against the Native Americans, and in the Middle East today, everyone wants peace. Well, except those who are suffering. They want justice. And so once again, we keep quoting Martin Luther King Jr., but we don't seem to believe him when he said that true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. Coexistence is also an empty term when it signifies living in parallel silence, equal but separate. That is true of national aspirations as it is of marriages. One might even argue that at least conflict is communication. For when the voices of one group have been totally silenced on behalf of peace, someone has been exterminated. And I truly appreciate your qualifying the term peace with the term just peace, for there is no other kind. You mention that at the dawn of history, the morality of war was not questioned. I have no evidence of that, for there have always been people who reflected upon such issues and questioned everything, artists for sure. But perhaps when we were primates, fighting over resources without the practice of negotiation, we lived only by necessity. But even in that struggle, we made a choice on behalf of dominance over excellence, on behalf of dominance over justice. And that choice has always inhibited our ability to share. And so I submit to you that the world has made a choice of war in its preference for dominance. I cannot accept that as a species we are incapable of stigmatizing war altogether. I realize we can't be naive in the short term, but we can aim diligently at finding intellectual and political ways of rendering war unimaginable. Let's admit it right here and now. The fact that war still exists is an indictment of our species. Perhaps the United Nations should remove the word human from the global vocabulary until we have earned it. Despite the efforts of international law to manage torture, proportionality of attack, and the death of civilians, never since its codification through the Geneva Conventions have there been more civilian deaths, of which children constitute the greatest number of victims. I agree with you more than ever. The line between combatant and civilian has been blurred. And I ask you, how would it not be so? In most conflicts, people want to defend their leaders and their soldiers at any cost. And although I am glad that international law tries to safeguard civilians, the actual discussion seems hypocritical, for in the end, we deny that civilians are actually the target, and that the only way to prevent this is to make war unthinkable.